appropriate time, let me know and we'll try and answer those. So let's first start off with some course objectives. I'm not going to read you everything because there's a lot of content on this, and I'm going to tell you kind of the basis for putting this report writing program together. But some of our objectives are to give you an organized and consistent format to use for your investigation report writing. We want to develop a comprehensive report that properly documents a scene and your supplemental investigation. These are living documents many times as you go through your investigation, which could be days, weeks, or months, sometimes years. We're going to describe origin and cause of a fire that's consistent with the 921 guidelines. And a lot of this is going to key into what you've heard earlier during the conference with Randy Watson, with the 921 changes. The new 2021 version just came out, and so I tried to incorporate that into what we're doing here. We're also going to talk, we hear all the time, but it's so important, the scientific method and describing alternative hypotheses. As you are doing at your scene, now we've got to document them. We're also going to look at some various formats to document your scene findings. There's how many people in here are public only investigators? Work for fire departments, districts, counties? Okay, great. And how many are private? Doing a lot of consulting and doing, okay, great. Doing fire investigations for primarily insurance companies. So I'm going to give you some of the different guidelines that you may use and may not use. Let me preface this by saying Bob and I can't hit everything that you may need for your report. I've seen many of your reports. Some of them are very, very good. And as I've looked at reports over the years and reviewed them, there's some idiosyncrasies that we'll talk about. Just because you see it in here does not mean this has to be the way that you do it. These are definitely ideas, and I would encourage you to take what works well for you and leave what doesn't. So with that, I kind of want to start off with the 921, the new 2021 version, and tell you it's somewhere for why we're doing this. And it happens to be in 921. So if we look at 16.5 reports, this is the final step in the documentation of the investigation, maybe the preparation and submittal of a report. The format and content of the report will depend on the needs of the organization or client on whose behalf the investigation was performed. So are you going to write it a little differently for the district attorney's office? Or are we going to write it differently for an insurance carrier? They're going to be a little bit different. How many of you have gone out on a dumpster fire and you ask the question, are there any witnesses, any suspects? Is there any evidence to pick up? Nope, I'm not coming out. How many people have done that? I don't see any hands, but I know this happens. Okay. Now, is it important to document these smaller fires that we go out on? Why would we document a dumpster fire or a small veg fire or a palm tree fire? Why would we at least document that? Shows history. What else? That's true. You could do that. The comment was so that we could write this up basically on our CV for later, I think was the comment. I cleaned it up a little bit. But yeah, what happens, has anybody interviewed a suspect on one fire and they end up telling you about a few other fires that they did earlier on? I had one, it was a 4-hour interview and we cleaned up about 15 or 20 fires over the past 10, 15 years. And if you never document something, it's really hard to go back and pick that up and tie that to somebody in the future. So it's very important for reports. The documentation chapter, well, it's not a chapter of documentation, but 12.3 talks about efforts to photograph, document, or preserve evidence should apply not only to evidence relevant to an investigator's opinion, but also to evidence or of reasonable alternative hypotheses that were considered and ruled out. What does that mean? Document not only what supports your hypothesis and what you believe the cause of the fire to be or the origin, but also what it's not. That's basically what it's saying. So we need to have a place that we can put this information, and those are reports. So let me talk a little bit about why this course was designed. Years ago, I worked for a small beach community down in the LA County area, and I came into the unit and did an evaluation and found out what we were doing, how were the investigators running things before I got there, and what I found was there was a problem with the reports. And you have one investigator who would write 10 pages, single line. There was one large paragraph that started on page 1 and ended on page 10. Very descriptive, but there was no categories, there was no format. It read horribly. It was in all caps. We talked about this yesterday. I had another investigator who wrote 2 or 3 sentences, and that was it. So I figured out we need to figure something out, and we have to document. We have to have something in writing. And so what I told my investigators was, here's the deal. If you go out on a fire that's not really going anywhere, we're still going to document it, and I want a minimum of an origin and cause report. It can be a few paragraphs. That's all you need to do. You can close out the file. We can move on. If it involves an arrest, if it involves a large loss, something of more importance, you're going to need to do a full report format. So what I did was I started putting together some slides like on our PowerPoint here that we're going to look at. And it was basically to help the investigators kind of do a flip chart. And it's got all categories kind of in a formatted order, and that you can go through, whether it's just a simple short report, that we would call it, or if you needed to do a whole long, big, involved report, it would have all the headings. And not only headings, it gave descriptions and suggested verbiage that you could use. So word got around to the South Bay, the task force, and they said, hey, can you teach this for the other investigators in the South Bay? And I said, yeah, of course. And then ended up, hey, could some other friends come? Ended up one day in Manhattan Beach, I think we had about 150 people from all over Southern California came out. And what I found out as a result was no one really gets taught how to write a proper report. In fact, how many people in here are company officers? How many people are investigators that are responsible for filling out INFRS reports? Does anybody know what an INFRS report is? Hopefully we do. Okay. So with that, if you look back, there was never a course that you took that said, here's how you fill out an INFRS report. It was probably your captain or a mentor that said, hey, kid, sit in front of the computer. There's pull down menus. Click on the one that's most correct for this report or this fire, and write a few things and move on. Is that more accurate? So this is not just your department issue. This is an issue really across the nation for fire reports. So that's kind of the background of the report. I've got some experience working for the insurance companies and also working criminal investigations. So I was able to tie in both, right? So a lot of these categories, they apply to both the private and the public side. Again, I'm going to give you everything. You could use this later as a flip chart, put it in a binder, write your report formatted this way or not. So it's up to you. I'm going to present it and some of the changes that have occurred, and we'll go from there. Is that fair? Okay. Incident reports are legal documents. So when you fill out those incident reports, right, at work, those are oftentimes requested from people like myself who work private stuff as well. We'll contact the local fire department and get your incident report and investigation report many times. So the INFRS report is typically the fire report, correct? Everybody agree? So what do you need to know about filling those out? When are those usually filled out? Sometimes 2 in the morning when you get back to the station. And what do you want to do? Get to sleep, get back to bed, right? So are these not preliminary reports? Many times as company officers, they'll go back and they'll fill out the report. Who's left at the scene? Us, right? The fire investigators. Now, we could work on this for days, weeks, months, and then come up with a final conclusion. I always encourage my investigators to talk with the first in captain or whoever's responsible for the report, let them know their findings so that it's consistent with what we're writing in our investigation reports, consistent with what's in the NFIRS reports. But that doesn't always happen because the NFIRS is typically a preliminary report. This was addressed in 921 in the 17 edition and again in the current 2021 edition. And it states, the guide considers NFIRS reports as incident reports and not investigation reports. The information contained in an NFIRS report should generally be considered as the preliminary report of the fire department concerning any fire explosion incident. An NFIRS report should not be used as a fire investigation report. So what I tell the captains, or in your case, the lieutenants or chief officers that may be out on a fire scene, if we don't talk and you don't know for sure what this is, just leave it undetermined or under investigation. And that way, when I come in later with my findings on my investigation report, it's consistent. The last thing you want to do on your fire report is say conclusively it was accidental. For instance, someone threw a cigarette out on the highway and started a vegetation fire, and then come with a suspect a week later saying, yeah, I started the fire and here's how I started it. And especially if it's the papers, that looks pretty silly. So be very careful with that. And that's the reason why that change occurred in 921. So your investigation reports and incident reports are read by numerous people, some that you have no idea about. And they're going to be looked at and they're going to be relied upon for the information. So be very careful what you do and what you write. You may end up in court. Would you think it's important to make sure we do a grammar or spelling check? The last thing you want is a life-size blow-up exhibit, right? Circled and highlighted, the stuff that you've misspelled, the stuff that you've written incomplete sentences or statements. So we just want to make sure they look good. Write in the first person. You're going to see some verbiage in this format that I'm going to show you that most of the time is first person, sometimes is not. And I'll point that out. To say this investigator did this, or this IO, right, for investigating officer did that. We typically don't talk like that anymore. If you did something, say I did this or I did that. Okay. I'm going to show you a video now. It's about 8 minutes long, and it's of a deposition. And the purpose of this is not to place fault or blame or anything. It's more to illustrate what could happen, very, very likely for you. So place yourself in this position. Imagine you are in the deposition getting asked these questions. And I think at the end, we'll talk about the importance of being well prepared. We'll talk about the importance of using the scientific method because people asking you questions, attorneys asking you questions, will be interested in your answers. And if you are sharp and if you understand definitions, right, and you understand your case, you'll do a lot better. So we'll talk about this in a second, but let's take a look at this.
Why is it important for a fire investigator to understand the dynamics of fire plume?
Well, you're going to produce, you're going to vaporize combustible objects, move that vapor throughout the structure through the plume, and may have a fire in a ceiling level, some other area of the structure.
Can you describe the characteristics of the triangular phase of development of a fire plume?
No.
Can you describe the characteristics of the columnar, C-O-L-U-M-A-R phase of development of a fire plume?
Not from memory, no.
Can you describe the characteristics of the conical phase of development of a fire plume?
Obviously, they're referring to whether it's a column, it's a cone from a large base to a small one. Without looking it up, I don't know.
You don't, that's not something that you, as a fire investigator, understanding can explain without looking it up?
Apparently not today, no.
Did you understand it when you investigated this fire?
I believe so.
Did you forget what those, the ability, did somehow in the 2 years that have gone by since you investigated this fire, has something happened that caused you to be unable, that caused you to know it then and not know it now?
Well, simply, there's been 2 years. I received short notice on this deposition, or I would have been studying all this stuff just so I can answer your question. It's not something I've done for 2 years, so yes, I'm losing some of it.
Okay. So in the 2 years since you've retired, you've lost the ability to describe the characteristics of the triangular phase of development, the columnar phase of development, and the conical phase of development of fire plumes. Is that correct?
I don't know whether I've lost it all. I'm having trouble recalling it, yes.
Did you ever know it in the first place?
I don't know, like I said, 921 wasn't the guide that was always used, so
But that's neither here nor there. When you investigated this fire, that's what was being used, right?
it was being used more and more, yes. It was.
All right. What's a U pattern?
I don't know.
Do you know how a U pattern is produced in a fire?
I'm not remembering right now, so.
All right. What's the truncated cone pattern?
I would have to refer to the diagrams in 921. I don't know those today off the top of my head.
When you investigated this fire, did you have to refer to 921 to understand what the patterns meant that you were looking at?
I was not investigating that fire in strict accordance with 921.
Did you intentionally not investigate the fire in strict accordance with 921?
No, I had investigated and processed the scene in accordance with procedures that were followed for all fire investigations with a systematic approach and processing of the scene.
Do you disagree with any of the science in 921?
I haven't looked at the latest edition, but no.
How about the one that was in effect when you investigated this fire?
No.
And whether you follow 921 or you don't follow 921, don't you have to understand what all these different fire patterns mean and how they're produced?
Yes.
Okay, so how could you have been qualified to investigate this fire if you forgot, if you don't have the ability to explain what the fundamental things that a fire investigator has to look at means? How is it that you can be qualified to investigate a fire if you don't even know what a truncated cone pattern is?
I've seen pictures. I've studied it. I've forgotten at this point, so I don't know how I'm supposed to answer it. Obviously, I don't know that right now.
How is it that you could be qualified to investigate this fire if what you were doing was analyzing burn patterns to determine how this fire progressed and moved throughout this house? If you don't understand these things.
Well, I did understand at the time, and I did look at the patterns, and it was my opinion that fire moved in certain directions through the house.
Okay. So you were, at the time you retired, you investigated fires for how long?
I don't know, 30-some years. I don't remember.
Okay. And you have some sort of fire science degree,
Yes.
and your CV has, several pages of training that you took.
Yes.
And you testified you investigated 2,800 fires.
Yes.
And you want the jury to believe that in 2 years you forgot the critical elements of what you needed to know to perform in your job for the last 30 years?
No, I don't think I forgot the critical elements. I'm not knowing some stuff that you're asking me here right now.
You testified earlier that understanding how fire patterns are produced is critical to be able to perform as a fire investigator, correct?
Yes.
And I've been asking you questions about how fire patterns are produced, correct?
I believe so.
Do you think my questions are unfair that I'm asking you these questions?
No.
You think these are questions that are fair game for someone who's coming in and saying they're an expert in the investigation of fires?
Yes.
And doesn't 1033 say that you're supposed to know these things in order to be qualified to be an investigator?
Doesn't list those specific items. It lists 13 categories.
In 1033, it talks about the requisite knowledge that a fire investigator has to have in order to be able to perform as a fire investigator, correct?
Yes.
Would it be fair to say that in my questioning here today, you would acknowledge that there are some limitations in your knowledge base with respect to how fire patterns are produced in fires?
I'm sorry.
Could you read that back?
Question, would it be fair to say that in my questioning here today, you would acknowledge there were some limitations in your knowledge base with respect to how fire patterns are produced?
Yes, there's some limitations on my being able to explain specific terms, yes.
Painful. I have a lot of empathy for the guy, because that could be any one of us if you're not prepared. So what did you see? What were the key points that you got out of this? Other than I'm glad that's not me. Knowledge of definitions. Before I go to court, before I go to a deposition, I always grab my 921 and just kind of flip through, make sure I understand ignition, sequence of the fire. Make sure I understand a lot of the definitions, right? If someone was to ask you, how does a candle burn? Could you describe it? If someone was to ask you, what's fire point? What's the ignition temperature? What's this? What's that? Could you, specifically answer those questions? Because it's not a trick. But the fact of the matter is, if you can't answer some of these basic questions about your case and or about just investigations, fire investigations as a whole, you're going to have a hard time. So what we're doing in this, here's the good news. I don't mean to bring everybody down. It was like it was a funeral, but here's what we're going to do. We're going to go through an origin and cause paragraphs, basically. I'm going to give you topic sentences. I'm going to give you general and specific sentences to use. And we're going to go step by step how to write a good origin paragraph, how to write a good cause. It ends up being 2-3 paragraphs for your report. And again, that's the minimum that I would suggest that you put together for any of your reports. Past that, we're going to go through more specific stuff. Fair enough? Okay. So let's start with the origin and cause. Overall, report should be clear, concise, factual, and most importantly, objective. You're not trying to sell anything here. You're trying to report. These are the items that we found. This is what I discovered, and we're going to go through the scientific method as we go through all of this. The origin and cause section can stand alone, or it can be part of your larger investigation report. Either way, we're going to write the origin and cause. So the origin and cause really, in my mind, comes up with 6 main areas, 6 main parts. The first part is your area of origin, which we'll talk about. The second is going to be your fire cause determination, followed by any contributing factors as to why the fire started. We want to specifically identify the ignition source, the material first ignited, and the act or omission that brought those together. Okay, so we're going to press ourselves to determine why. It's not good enough to say, yeah, fire is accidental, electrical in the attic. Okay, that could be, but why? What specifically happened up there? We're going to talk about elimination of other causes. Have we seen that before? Why are we doing that? Why are we eliminating other causes? Because that's part of your methodology and the scientific method, right? And we're also going to address life safety factors, and I'll tell you why that's so important. So here we go. Area of origin. This paragraph has at least 2 sentences. Now, depending on how you write this, and I'll describe in a second, but we want to have a general area of origin sentence, a specific area of origin sentence, and then any additional descriptions that you may have. Maybe their fire patterns, maybe their witness statements, maybe you did more investigation, maybe there's arc mapping involved that help you determine a room or an area of origin. And also, for those of you who are trying to take notes feverishly, I know that this PowerPoint presentation is online, so you should have gotten an email. So don't get writer's cramp during this. You guys can review all of this later. There's another area that we're going to talk about later in the report that gives you the opportunity to basically showcase your fire indicators, whether it's a piece of furniture, whether it is a bed frame or a mattress or upper wood cabinet, kitchen or something like that, that you'll be able to point to and describe your specific points that you relied upon that you want to show. This is how I found my area of origin. You can do that. You can do it here if you like. It's up to you. But that's the area of origin paragraph that we're going to talk about right now. So first sentence is typically what I call the general area of origin. The description is it could be a room, a compartment, a quadrant location, possibly in a large commercial structure that you want to say this is where the fire first started. And I always tell people, imagine if you were outside a large apartment complex and you wrote some notes down on a piece of paper and handed it to somebody who's not from the fire service. And you said, do me a favor, read this. And at the end of it, I want you to point where I've described. Does that make sense? And that's where the origin is. So hopefully we can do this in like 2 sentences. I'm going to show you how to do that. So the first one is your general. And here's a couple examples. Now, you could say this fire was determined to have originated in the south bedroom, or you could say, I determined, right, that the fire started in the south bedroom. Be very careful when you are diagramming your scenes, because I know everybody's diagramming their scenes, right? Sketches, at least from the when you're on scene, you may go back and put it to a nice computer-generated diagram. But be careful how you designate your bedrooms. Is it the northeast bedroom or is it bedroom 3? Whatever it is, make sure you're consistent throughout your report and your diagram. You could say the fire originated in the engine compartment of the vehicle. Again, very general. Or it originated in the southeast quadrant of the warehouse. One sentence to get us to the general area of origin. Right, we're halfway there. The next one. So I'm going to give you a garage fire. And we're going to look at this. And I just want you guys to get a little bit of practice on how we would describe. So if we said that, see if I can do this. If we said, here we go. Here we go. If we said that this wall is the north wall and the fire happened here, I could say something like, I determined the general area of origin was in the northwest corner of the attached garage. Well, there's only one garage. There's only one northwest corner. So we've already gotten ourselves to right back here. Would you agree? We're going to do a specific area of origin sentence, and then we're going to get a little closer. So this sentence could describe furniture, possibly a wall, a corner, an appliance. It could be at, near, adjacent to, on top of, below, at floor level. Any of those descriptors will get you your specific area of origin. So some examples. The fire's more specific area of origin was located on top of the dresser, which was located against the east bedroom wall. Is that getting a little more specific? Or if we say the more specific area of origin was located at the portable space heater, which was adjacent to the foot of the bed. So some of these words like adjacent to, near, on top of, can that really change? Because that may affect your ignition sequence, correct? Because if heater is too far away, it may not have sufficient heat energy to ignite the bedding or the mattress, correct? So those words like adjacent to, next to, on top of can be very important. So getting back to our example here, here's our specific area of origin, happened to be on a wood workbench. And we may say something like, the more specific area of origin was located on top of the west end of the wood workbench. And then you get right there. Now, if for some reason you can get even more specific, go ahead and do that. That's fine. But right then, we've just had 2 sentences, and we basically have accomplished our goal of identifying the area of origin. Would you agree? Are there sometimes you get to the room of origin and you can't really get too much more specific than that? Well, leave it there. If you want to add some verbiage as to how you got there, there's other places in the report that you can talk about, flame and vector analysis. But if this is a short report that you're putting together and you're closing the file, you may add those couple sentences here. Any questions about our origin paragraph? Sir? Sure. The question was, how often do we need to get to the point of origin and say specifically it's right here? Fair? So, agreed. Number one, I would say if we look at fire cause, right? We have the heat source, the area where the point of origin, right, is the heat source, fuel first ignited, the point where those two come together. Sometimes very easy, right? A candle. Well, even a candle, was it the combustible items on the right side or the left side? Where exactly was it? Appliances, was it was it inside the appliance? Was it outside? Was it next to? Did it heat up and catch something on fire over there? So I would agree, be very careful. And instead of saying it exactly occurred here, unless you know for sure that it did, if you're conclusive with it, then go ahead and put that there. But if not, you may just say this is the more specific area of origin and leave it at that. Do you have any advice on that, Bob?
We'll learn later today how important words are in your report. And the story I'd like to tell is, for some reason, since I've retired from the fire service, I have to go and get a new suit about every 2 years because I keep shrinking around the waist. So I go to the tailor. They say, well, what kind of suit do you want? And I said, well, I want a suit that when I walk into a deposition or a courtroom, opposing counsel is going to throw himself on the floor and scream, we did it, throw the book at us. He says, we don't make those. You can't get them. Same way with reports. The opposing counsel are really good at looking at the words you choose to use. And you're going to learn today as we go through all of this, and what I have to present later on is that there's no silver bullet. There are times where the best tactic is to be prepared for those types of questions where they go this way or this way. They want to see how you show. They want to see you sweat. And how do you respond to those, I'll say it, stupid questions sometimes? Was it on the left side of the left burner or on the right side of the left burner? Whatever the case may be. So I guess my advice would be is just be prepared to answer those questions. And a good example I had in a deposition, the attorney asked me to read the first sentence in paragraph 2 on the front of my report. And I said items A, B, C, and D were in the area of origin. He said, well, why did you move them? I said, I didn't move them. He says, would you turn back to page 27 of your report and talk and read paragraph 2? And he says, and I said, okay. I says, we're in the room of origin, and at the area of origin were items A, B, C, and D. He said, well, why did you move them? I said, I did move them. He says, well, your report says you did. Go back to page 1. I read page 1 again. It says items A, B, C, and D were in the area of origin. He says, see, you moved them. Now, I was getting frustrated. What the heck was he talking about? He said, go back to page 27 and read that again. And it says at the origin were items A, B, C, and D. He said, and suddenly dawned on me. We are arguing the difference between the items that were in the area of origin or at the area of origin. We are arguing the words in and at. And I rolled my eyes and says, okay, I give up. You're right. I changed in to at and at to in. And we got past it. We went on and we touched. So, questions like that, I think you may just have to prepare yourself on how you're going to address it the same way you would do. And Bob touched on it before, and we'll talk about it again. When you do your origin and cause investigation and you start memorializing that in a report, you have to be extremely confident in your origin determination and your cause determination. And I would say even more so, your confidence level even has to be equal and probably higher than being able to say where the fire didn't start and how the fire didn't start. Because if you can't confidently dispute or dispel some of the counter claims that opposing counsel may have, what does that create in a criminal case? Reasonable doubt. What happens if there's reasonable doubt to the bad guy? He walks. So my suggestion would be is just be able to anticipate those types of questions, challenges. Yeah. No, you go back to the administration section of 921 where it talks about, not every fire is the same. Not everything in this book will be the same. If you deviate from this document, it's not necessarily wrong, just be able to explain it. There was quite a interesting proposal this last time around that, thank goodness, in my humble opinion, was denied, and that was they wanted to change point of origin to a volume of origin. And he had a rather lengthy, articulate argument, but I just couldn't imagine. So how big is your volume, and all that other stuff. So, yeah, there's no silver bullet. And I don't think if any of you walked into the class today expecting to walk out with that silver bullet and the perfect report, I'll save you some time. You could probably leave now, but we don't want you to do that. We'll give you some good tips and ideas on how to make each report better and better. I think that's just the goal we've got right now. So,
Thanks. Okay, yes, sir. Wow. Yeah. Very interesting.
my goal is when you walk out of here, the next report you do, and I would bet probably the majority of you and us fall into this trap, is we review our report for what it tells us and how it tells us. Okay. Well, that's a good portion of it, but what is really important is to go back when you review reports, burrow down into the weeds on this thing and look at the word that you've chosen to use to describe a particular observation or fact. And how can that word be misconstrued? You know, like the word plausible, okay? That's a plausible hypothesis. Well, have you ever looked at the definition of plausible in Merriam-Webster's dictionary that's recognized by NFPA 921? And essentially, in that dictionary, it defines plausible as, and I'm going to paraphrase, yeah, it sounds like a good idea, but it's probably false. All right. So if you say, yeah, plausible hypothesis is, the candle started a fire. Well, yeah, that sounds like it could have started a fire, but by definition, plausible means, yeah, it sounds like it could be right, but usually it's specious or false. So words are important. Those darn guys on the other side are not your friend, and they dissect every word. And why have you chosen to use that word? Why? In my example, why'd you choose in here and at there? You must have moved the evidence. It's how you show and how you're able to answer those tough questions, and they're very good at making you sweat. So our job up here in your report is not to make it a cakewalk. It's not going to happen that way. The opposing side is good at what they do. We want to make it less uncomfortable, okay, and give you some tools to be able to weather the storms that may be coming at you. Okay, we're not going to sugarcoat this and say we've got the panacea here. We've got the perfect pill. It's not going to happen that way, but we will be able to show you some polish that we can put on your reports that speak highly of your work.
Thank you. Bob, I think we got a couple questions. Got it. Okay, thank you. Very good. Okay, let's continue on. We've got our area of origin. Let's move on to our cause. We talked, Randy talked earlier about chapter 20 and classification of fire cause. And I know we've got a lot to cover in here, so I don't want to spend a tremendous amount of time. However, this is very important. Section 19.8, incident classification. Classifying a fire incident is different from cause determination or analyzing the fire incident for the purpose of assuming responsibility. It goes on to say, if an incident requires classification, the investigator should refer to the appropriate classification system. What is that? Well, I looked around. I looked through 921. I looked through NFPA. And I referred back to NFIRS, right? The National Fire Incident Reporting System, right? That's what everybody is filling out when you go on a fire. And I took a look, and we'll talk about that. NFIRS says under cause of ignition, the general causal factor that resulted in heat source igniting a combustible material. Okay, so I went through NFIRS, and this is what I found. Cause of ignition codes. I found 6 of them. Intentional, unintentional, failure of equipment or heat source, active nature, cause under investigation, or cause undetermined after investigation. Well, that's already established. And I'm going to go forward one more. We're going to talk about each one a little bit. But I looked under NFPA 901. And that's the standard classifications for incident reporting and fire protection data. So this is already established. I don't have to make a new classification up. It already exists. And if you notice, these items here, intentional, unintentional, failure of equipment or heat source, act nature, cause under investigation, cause undetermined, looks very similar, doesn't it? In fact, let me go back to the NFIRS codes. It's exact. So this may be one way. I'm not sure it's the only way, but this is a classification that's supported by NFPA 901 and also NFIRS. So if you were to change some of your verbiage to fit under these cause, and again, this is not fire cause, this is cause classification. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
And I've actually got a slide deck on classification as well. I'm of the opinion we have no reason to classify the cause of a fire. I quite frankly think it's a bit dangerous and at times may diminish the value of our report. And I wrote an article about how fire investigators should not be classifying fires. We should stick to what we know. We should stick to the ignition scenario, the origin and the cause of the fire. What was the ignition source? What was the first fuel? How the two came together and what brought them together. And the example I give you is, have we all seen this where someone comes home from a late night, decides to fry up some potatoes, and he pours cooking oil in a cast iron pot, places it on the left rear burner of the stove, turns it on to medium high, and goes to sit on the couch while he waits for the oil to heat up, falls asleep, and he's awakened by the smoke alarm, and we have a fire from the burning oil. How many have had a cooking fire like that? Okay. Now I'm here to tell you, in this particular example, you have a Nest doorbell camera in that room, and you can see the guy come home. He pulls out a cast iron pot. He fills it with cooking oil, places it on left rear burner. You can see him turn the burner on, walk out of the room. You see him sit down on the couch, and you see him fall asleep until the smoke rises out of the oil. It catches on fire, sets off the smoke detector. He wakes up and runs out of the house. I mean, that is your origin and cause investigation, okay? And to use a quote from my cousin Vinny, where she says, and it's balls on accurate. I mean, I'm not hiding anything at all. That is the cause of the fire, okay? You've done a great job. If you now grade your investigation, your origin and cause determination, you can grade it on a scale of 1 to 10. You can grade it on a scale of 0 to 100%. You're going to give that a 10, or you're going to give it 100%. Absolutely. Okay. Now classify it. Admit it. Most of us would say it sounds like an accidental fire. Okay. But we're not the only stakeholders in that fire investigation and in that loss. I think it was one of the speakers this week talked about, Ed talked about how he found out more information when he went to NICB. How about if some of the other stakeholders in that fire loss contacted NICB and they suddenly find out that this guy has had 6 cooking fires in 4 years in 5 different places that he lived. All right. Does that change your classification? It probably does. Suddenly now this guy has a quote history of cooking fires, and you come to find out that that's his business. He runs insurance fraud business. Why is that dangerous? Because the guy continues to do it. And I've seen it. I've seen letters from insurance companies saying, yes, we better pay this claim off because the fire department says it's accidental. But we've got data, and other stakeholders have come forward in that investigation to say, wait a minute, this guy does it all the time. He was due to have another because of his prior history. Let's stick with what we know. Let's say, here's the origin of the fire, here's how it all happened, and leave it at that. That's my opinion. That's not the opinion of anyone else. But I think we do a disservice sometimes if we just routinely classify these fires as accidental when they may not. I also have a real strong opinion about undetermined. I don't like that word. I like unresolved. It sets the stage for conversation. Undetermined has become so common in our lexicon with fire investigations when our clients, or maybe even your supervisors on the public side, see undetermined, it's filed away. I'm finding out when I tell them it's unresolved, what do you mean it's unresolved? Well, here are the working hypotheses I developed that we have at this point. Some of them are accidental scenarios. Some of them may have indication of subrogation or product failure or anything like that. But I'd let them make the decision on whether or not they want to spend the time and expense and cost to further the investigation. It just generates more discussion. If I don't know how the fire started, it's not undetermined, it's unresolved. I know a lot about that fire. I know a lot about where it started, and I know all the different ignition sources that could have created it or the scenarios that could have created it. To say it's undetermined sort of shortcuts your knowledge of that investigation. Unresolved gives you some things to talk about, and gives your stakeholders, your supervisors, your clients, something to consider as to whether or not they want to push that investigation forward. So again, words are important. It's how you sell it and spell it out, but that's my thoughts.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so just to kind of dovetail off of that, these are the classifications if you are pressed. And many times, you know, what do we, or what should we fire investigators say to the PIO or the chief officers to say, hey, we need to put a statement out to the press? What should we be saying? The cause is under investigation, right? Especially for a fire fatality. You shouldn't be releasing any sort of fire causes until at least you get the toxicology back 30 days later or so. Okay, so let's go over real quick, just some common unintentional, right, or accidental causes. And again, like Bob was saying earlier, some of these things, candle fires and cooking fires, smoke, any of these things under the right conditions could be accidental or unintentional, or could they be intentional? Absolutely, and that is the thrust of all of this. But combustible materials too close to a heat source, cooking, candles, careless smoking. Some of the intentional causes. This is 3.3.121. This is a definition of incendiary fire, right? These change every now and these change every now and then. And also, when you get into court, do some of these definitions change? They're not always consistent with 921. But for right now, the 2021 edition states a fire that is intentionally ignited in an area or under circumstances where and when there should not be a fire. Okay. Has anybody used chapter 23 to get some ideas for fire or actually intentional incendiary fire indicators? I think Randy had mentioned this before. He was talking about the new updates that you go to this chapter. I think Randy said this. You go to this chapter after you've identified that you've got an intentionally set fire. And many times what it will do is it'll allow you to find some other indicators that you can document in your report that you may find. Here's a few of them. Yeah, go ahead before we do that.
One thing I want to say about these classification, when I wrote that article, I got about 30 comments back on it. And two comments stood out to me the most that I responded to the opinions. One of them was, my prosecutor won't take it if I don't classify it as incendiary. Well, no, your prosecutor won't take it if it doesn't fit the elements of the crime, okay? And if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck and swims like a duck, the darn thing's a duck. Go ahead and call it incendiary. But make sure that your investigation and your report can meet all the elements of the crime in your jurisdiction. That's what they're looking for. I'm not saying you shouldn't. I mean, go ahead, call a duck and classify it as incendiary. The other comment I got back was, well, we have to classify the fires because that determines where we put our fire prevention budget. And I responded back, I said, well, actually, you should be able to, and using the kitchen fire as an example, and let's say that kitchen fire, we don't know if it's an accidental fire, or we don't know if that guy is a professional kitchen fire victim. Every 18 months he has a kitchen fire. We don't know that. But you as a public official, if you're the PIO and you're looking at all these fires, it's not whether or not it's an accidental cooking fire or an intentionally set cooking fire. It's a kitchen fire, and you should be able to stand in front of that building while the smoke is still wafting out the windows and the firefighters are cleaning up the scene. And you should be able to deliver a statement to press and should be able to talk to them for a good 10 minutes, never saying a word about what caused the fire behind you or what happened behind you, but you can talk about kitchen safety. You can talk about portable heat in the wintertime safety. You should be able to deliver a public safety message and fire prevention message using that as the backdrop, because you've got everybody's attention now. They're seeing all the smoke coming out of this building. They're wrapped around the TV watching what's going on and you've got that opportunity to push your fire prevention message, and you should never have to say anything about what's going on behind you. So the fact that you don't classify fires, I'm not saying across the board. If it's duck, if it's an incendiary fire, go ahead. If it fits the element of the crime, absolutely. And for your fire prevention message, you should never have to use classifications. You can look at the ignition scenario, kitchen safety, bedroom fires, storage and garage. All of these things are good fire prevention messages without having to classify them. So that's what I have to say about that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so here's a few of the incendiary fire indicators that you may or may not find at your scene, but these are some of the top. There's many more, but multiple fires is a big one. Trailers, lack of expected fuel load, unusual fuel load, burn injuries, that definitely raises eyebrows. Can you have a burn injury with an accidental fire? Of course, okay. Presence of ignitable liquids in an area of origin. If it's the garage, maybe. It's the living room, probably not, right? Yes, sir. The question was, what do I mean by trailers? And I could make a joke. It's not, but anyway, trailers could be ignitable liquid displacement or disbursement. That kind of trailer. Okay, all right. I was to do my single and double, but I won't do that today. All right. Let's look at an actual fire scene I investigated a few months ago. It's a one-bedroom apartment, and I went out, and I won't tell you where this is, but as you can see, there's very little, nothing left in the fire scene. The photograph on the left-hand side is the living room, and we see various fire indicators. Looks like in most of the areas, the drywall did a good job at the ceiling. And you can see there was a slider leading out to the balcony. The right side photograph shows, let me see if I can make this work. Almost, there we go. So we've got a wall heater, we've got the entrance to the hallway back there, and then we've got the kitchen over here. So there's some pretty decent fire patterns up here, but it looks like this room reached flashover at some point. We have floor to ceiling damage. And then here's a view of the kitchen. Just by looking at it, I can tell it didn't start in the kitchen. We've got, the upper cabinets above the stove look really good. We've got some patterns right here on this wall coming out of the hallway. So I look over in the hallway, and this is a linen closet. And one of the shelves is completely gone. I've got some charring. I can tell you that without looking at all the photographs, it definitely didn't start in the rear bedroom or bathroom. So I look at this area on the right, and I said, I think this is where we had our fire start. And because I asked myself the question, if the fire started in the living room, would I expect to see this kind of fire damage in a linen closet? And the answer is no. And that's part of the discussion you have with yourself, kind of mental reflection on some of these hypotheses that you develop. So I do my diagram, I take my photos, I look around for anything else in that hallway. I find a light switch, and that's it. No outlets, nothing. I haven't had an opportunity yet to interview anybody. So that's kind of where I am for now. We, as Ed talked about yesterday, the importance of doing a neighborhood canvas. I went and knocked on a few doors. I end up talking to the neighbor right across the hall, and I say, "Hey, were you here when this fire started?" And he said, "Actually, yeah." He said the neighbors from the subject apartment came over and banged on my door, and I said, "Oh, so what happened? What did you see?" All that, all my questions. And he said, "Yeah, I went across." He said, "I actually I grabbed my cell phone," and he said, "The lady over there, isn't all there." And so I went over and had my cell phone playing. So let me show you. I'm going to show this to you a couple times. We'll slow it down, but here's the video that he showed.
Oh, wow.
All right, you see what happened there? All right, let me back this up if I can. I'm gonna go. Did anybody see anything on the first pass? Anybody pick up anything? What'd you see? She's wearing a hat. Okay. It went quick. Say again. Okay. Someone said 2 starts, and you're exactly correct. So let's slow this down and see if I can. Here. All right. So we open the door. Here's the woman from inside. You get a good view here of the living room. Nothing happening in there by the wall here. Now, as we pan to the balcony, we've got a fire on the balcony. We've got the vertical blinds still intact. We're getting some smoke inside. Does it look like the glass sliders closed or open? Looks closed to me. So fire on the balcony, and it magically jumps. No fire here. And now we've got fire in that linen closet. Okay, so I caught one of them, and not in the kitchen. She's the tenant. She and her brother live there. And but the point of this clearly is an intentional fire. Clearly, this has multiple sets that are separate and distinct from one another. And we definitely identify that. Now the question comes up, well, geez, we wrote this origin paragraph. How do we make it for 2 areas or different areas? That's okay. You can say, I identified 2 separate and distinct areas of origin. Area of origin number 1 was identified as the balcony, if that's what you wanted. Area of origin number 2 was identified as this, and you make them completely separate for your origin. Now we start getting to our cause, and then we're gonna talk about that, how we write that up. But this is an example of additional information, because without this video and without talking to that witness, where would I have been? Single point, possibly in the linen closet. I would have had to have eliminated anything else, any possible or potential ignition sources in that area. And we go from this, makes it a lot easier, right? So here's a few things, a few indicators that are not directly related to combustion. And that's remote location with the view blocked, forced entry, fires near service equipment or appliances, removal or replacement of content items. Any of these things, is this our fire cause? This is not the ignition source, the material first ignited, and how they came together, but these are data, right? Gather facts. So this is data that we're bringing in, and like Bob had alluded to before, when you contact NICB, when you contact other witnesses who may have overheard or saw something different than what you saw, that may change where you're going to end up. We've got some arson motives, as Ed was talking about yesterday. There's 6 main ones that the FBI has identified years ago, and there's many more. But most fires will fall under subcategories of these. Spite and revenge and profit, as Ed was talking about before, constitute a higher percentage of all arson fires. Then we go into failure of equipment. Right, that was part of one of the new classifications. But some common causes: the structure's electrical system, various appliances that you can find in the structure, and/or machinery. This is Bob's favorite slide, the undetermined fire cause. I don't want to say we're seeing, but I think nationally, the amount of undetermined fires has gone up over the past few years. Why would you think that has occurred? What's that again? More lawyers involved? Possibly. Because that makes us do what? Be more cautious, right? Wow, I'm a little gun shy about calling it X, Y, or Z. More obliterated. So the one of the possible answers was we've got from the old conventional legacy materials, we have everything's got some sort of petroleum base in it now, so they burn hotter. Our fire scenes are damaged a lot more, and so maybe as ready to say it's the cause or that cause. So there are places where you can say undetermined. Absolutely. So when you are applying, the one of the questions or comments was the application of the scientific method. So when you're doing that, you're a lot more what? Systematic, organized, and possibly you're reviewing all of the other ignition sources in your area of origin, right? And if you can't conclusively eliminate them, right, 2 or more, then we're taught we need to say undetermined. However, unresolved is a great alternative. I like that. Can you get across in your report? Can you say the cause of the fire is undetermined and then give further information that to the reader gives them a lot of great information? I've got a living room fire and I've got evidence of ashtrays and cigarette butts. I know there's a smoker there. I also have some candles, right? And my interview, maybe I don't even get an interview, or the person doesn't want to talk to me, or they say, well, I was smoking and yeah, we had candles. And I can't tell you exactly if it was the candle or if it was the smoking materials. But at the end of the day, I can eliminate everything else and I can still call it undetermined, but I can, in the narrative, describe candles or smoking. Does that give my client a lot better indication of what's going on and what it's not? Okay, so we can do that as well. So we've got the, in circumstances where all hypotheses have been rejected, or if 2 or more cannot be rejected, the only choice for the investigators to conclude the fire cause or specific causal factors is undetermined, and that's straight out of 921. If new information becomes available, you of course may provide a more accurate cause. I'm going to show you an example of that in a second. This is also the section under chapter 19, the new chapter, undetermined fire cause. If the level of certainty is only possible or suspected, the fire cause is undetermined. So if we said it's undetermined or it's yet to be determined, it may be a play on words. I think you really want to be specific, and again, you choose your words carefully, because later on, if someone says, "What do you mean by that?" have a good justification for it, right? So whatever you're writing in your report, you may, if you go to a deposition or court, be called out on it and have to describe what it is that you meant when you said that. Dale. Right, and I'm going to show you some verbiage that a lot of people put. I put this, especially if an investigation is ongoing, or maybe we haven't gone to a. Oh, I'm sorry. What did you say, Dale? Oh God. Okay. So the question was, what happens if at the time you're writing your report, at the time during the investigation, it's undetermined, and then what if you get additional information? Is the question. You may state. And a lot of people put draft on a watermark across, or a preliminary report. I've seen things that say additional information may allow me to change my conclusions. Anything like that that you can determine something different with more information. Great, that's a great question. The question was, is the undetermined conclusion, is it always like that, or can it change? Is that correct? So it absolutely can change with further information. I'm going to show you a perfect example of this. So great question. Okay, yes, sir. Sure. Got it. Got it. Got it. And the question was, we feel as investigators maybe some pressure, right, from either our bosses or people above us to give an answer that if we can't give a cause determination, that we're kind of failures and we're not doing or we don't know our job. But that's absolutely not the case. It's much better to err on undetermined, continue working the case, continue using the scientific method, gathering more facts, having more hypotheses, testing those hypotheses, and then hopefully coming to a final. But it's very possible we don't ever come to a final right now. Rick.
And I don't want to keep going, I know you get back to that. Why are we as an industry pushing to give our opinion? And I'm not sure if the word I'm trying to remember how word it is without listening to I decided to summarize everything we've done in one word.
I got to do a Zoom thing. For the Zoom folks out there, why are we pressing ourselves to determine a one word and put everything together as to our findings in one word? And that's a great question. Did you want to?
That we've taken maybe hours, weeks, months, years to get completed, and we're doing it in one word.
Right, right. Well, I think the big reason why we're getting forced or feel like we're forced or pressured into one word is justification for our existence, right? We're checking the box. That's why, the insurance company has to have an investigator come out. They want us to go out and give them answers. And sometimes we can give answers. Other times I don't have all the answers. Or, many of us have been to fire scenes. It was a 2-story house and now it's down to a foot of rubble. And if you tell me that it's completely burned, and if you tell me you can be able to come in and say, yep, it started right there, unless you started it, right? You may have a hard time. We're going to be forced. It's not an end all be all. If you continue working that case, you may or may not get further information that will allow you to change it. But my thing is, you can call a fire undetermined if you're forced into saying, if someone says, I need a cause classification, I think that's why we're talking. We don't like to be tied to that cause classification, because in your report, you can still describe your findings. And that's why a lot of people don't call it a report. They call it a summary of findings. And then you can describe these. Now, depending, if I wanted to know, back to my example of the candle or the cigarette, both potentially are unintentional fires. Both could be time delays for an intentional fire. So it's in the words that you use put together to paint the picture. What evidence do you have? I always encourage people. I know there's some attorneys that are watching today, but I always tell investigators, go get for California the CalJIC, right? The jury instructions. That's what's going to be read to the jury. Make sure you are looking at what the elements of the crime are, and make sure you're addressing those in your report. So I agree, Rick. At the end of the day, the fire cause is not as important as everything else that goes into this cake that we take out of the oven and put as a report.
And let's face it, I come from 20 years of fire service experience as well, and I can say with quite a bit of confidence, no one in this room has enough time and resources to conduct a full and complete investigation on every fire scene. And chances are, you go to a fire scene and you have no data or facts or any inkling that this is an intentionally set fire, but you're well versed in the industry and you know that there's going to be other private investigators coming in for the insurance interest, and you're going to back out and protect that scene for them. Hey, listen, this looks like an accidental fire. We're not going to mess it up for the insurance people. This could be a big loss, whatever, and walk away. Well, from the department that we came from, that I came from, and my predecessors, over the years, we developed some verbiage. And I like what he said about over the years, undetermined has come to mean we don't know anything. That's absolutely false, and we all know that. But the layperson or someone reading that report says undetermined, oh, they must not know anything, or they must not know. So, and that's why I've sort of embraced unresolved. If I have to put something in there, but my prior employer on the public side, the investigators there, if they recognize with the data they've got and the time they've had to invest in that investigation, have developed a handful of working hypotheses. And those working hypotheses, just based on the data they have at that point, may indicate a accidental scenario or some sort of product defect, which doesn't involve any type of criminal activity. They're certified peace officers. They're going to back off and just preserve the scene for the insurance investigators. And in their reports, they will say, and they'll use the verbiage right out of 921 that says, based on the time and resource limitations that we had during this investigation, we were able to identify 5 working hypotheses as to the possible cause of this fire. And they will list them. And then they will talk about that list and say, based on these working hypotheses, they all appear to be based on the data, an accidental scenario, and we understand and recognize there are other interests out there that may want to do and have the ability to conduct further testing and evaluation to determine the exact cause of the fire. Hence, this fire is unresolved, undetermined, and it will be secured until the private interest and the insurance company want to take over the scene. You know, wordsmith it how you want. Put perfume on that pig, whatever, however you want to. But that is some of the art, if you will, if there still is art in our industry of how to articulate your findings and how to keep that door open. The boilerplate language, unless or until further information becomes available. I have the option, or I expressly want to be available to adjust my opinion or reevaluate all the data if more comes available from other sources. However you want to do that. Those are some of the things that you want to use and take advantage of to keep you from being painted in a corner, is I guess the best way to say it.
Okay. Got it. Okay. Perfect. All right, we're going to power through a little bit, and I know we're coming up on a break in a little while, so everybody okay? All right. Undetermined. That's been a topic of discussion for multiple years and will continue to be a topic. Okay, how certain are you with your conclusion, right? With your final hypothesis? Well, I've drawn up a couple sentences here that you may be able to use. Conclusive, most probable, or possible. I like to look at this as conclusive being, I'll give you an example. There's a candle fire in a living room. I interview the owner, occupant, and she said, I had people over, I had the candle lit. I totally forgot to blow it out. You find the candle, maybe you find the lighter. There's nothing there. You've eliminated all other possible ignition sources. And you say, you're pretty certain, like this is about 100%. I don't see any other problem. You could say, I have conclusively determined the fire was caused by an untainted candle. Agreed? Okay, so back that off. You find the candle, same living room. You find the remains. That's where your origin is. But you do an interview, and she says, "No, yeah, I had a candle burning earlier, but no, I remember blowing it out." So it's kind of a, is she saying that because the insurance isn't going to pay? Is she embarrassed? I mean, there's a lot of reasons why, or maybe she blew it out real quick, walked away, but it really wasn't out. So in her mind, it was out. So if you back off a little bit and you say, I'm not feeling conclusive that I'm for sure that this happened this way, you may back it off a little bit and say, the most probable cause of the fire was. And again, if as NFPA 921 says, if you've got 2 or more possible fire causes, you have to call it undetermined for right now, pending further information, or maybe you don't get another information. But that's just the determination as to how conclusive you are with your fire cause. So real quick, let's go over this. We've got our origin paragraph done. Check the box off. The next one I start is the fire cause, right? So I always start my sentence or my topic sentence of my paragraph with the cause of this fire was determined to be blank. Insert there, whatever that is. Now that sounds easy, but as we've been talking about earlier, our words mean different things, and you have to be careful. So if you had a plumber who was sweating pipes in the bathroom, and a fire started in the wall, as these things do, what would you determine that cause to be? If I said the cause of the fire was determined to be, some people say accidental. What are some other items? Cause was determined to be unintentional, maybe. Does it have, what happened? Let me ask you this. Why did that happen in that example? Because if you're sweating pipes, doesn't always, do you always have a fire? No, most of the time you don't. Was there a failure of something? Okay, was the combustibles too close to a heat source? Yeah, someone else raise their hand. And Scott, we're going to try and do it both sides of the room, so he has to run. Why else? Could it have been a failure to properly use a heat shield? Right? Could it be failure not to have a spray bottle of water, or to stay there long enough, or have other precautions? So, what are those causes? And they all have ramifications depending on who your client is, right? So the first topic sentence is, and again, we're not going to get too deep into this because we could talk for the rest of the day under that. But after you give your first sentence, what happened? What was going on prior to the fire? And I always tell investigators, if you want to know, find out what happened before the fire. What was different? The fire started in a utility room. When was the last time anybody was in there? If the fire started at the dryer, when was the last time someone was using the dryer for laundry? Something changed. Something was different. It's not that often that fires just occur out of nowhere. Typically, something happened. So I always ask the tenants or occupants or the RP or whoever, and I'll say, so what happened before the fire? So I write that. So here's some examples. Prior to the fire, the occupant left a candle burning. All right. More. At the time of the fire, the business was closed. The last person to leave was the owner. And then you can go on to describing that. Or prior to the fire, roofers were using a propane torch on the roof. So again, put that in your report as to what was happening before the fire. Again, we can talk about how the fire was discovered. When I'm interviewing somebody, I ask them, I don't say, what happened, as I say, how did you first learn? How did you first discover that there was a fire? Does it make a difference if they said, well, geez, I was asleep and the smoke alarm woke me up, opposed to the dog licked my face, or I heard this or I heard that? That will give you more of an indication than just saying, what happened. So the tenants were alerted to the fire when the smoke alarm in the hall sounded, or the owner of the building received a call on his cell phone from another tenant. Who was that tenant? Like Ed was talking about yesterday, let's do some follow-up. Let's talk to the reporting party. Let's talk to the civilian or person who was there before the fire department was there. The person or equipment responsible for the fire. If you know, put that in there. John Smith, this would be an arson fire, right? Deliberately poured gasoline on his girlfriend's car, then lit it on fire. So, terms like deliberate or intentional, those are helpful because those have different connotations. How about the lithium ion batteries exploded after charging for multiple hours? And then you describe more about that. Maybe it was in someone's pocket. Maybe it was charging on the nightstand. So those are some of the items that we want to address in our fire cause paragraph. And we're going to put it all together later. Contributing factors. If you notice in the top right, you'll see a small letter E2. That corresponds to your infers code. If you want to go back and find out where to find these. So I took the top most used examples and kind of put them here. You can look at that: construction or design or installation deficiency. Failure to clean or maintain equipment. Is that a big one? Right? Where do we see that at? Dryer fires, stoves, bathroom exhaust fans. How many times are people going up there and vacuuming like they probably should? Heat source too close to combustible materials. Improper fueling techniques. Improper disposal of smoking materials is a big one. So these contributing factors, here's some examples that you can use in your document. Failure to use a heat shield while sweating pipes may have contributed to the cause of the fire. May have contributed. May. Am I saying it did for sure? Unless I know, right? Yeah, so we have to leave, sometimes we have to leave some of these things open for other experts to come in and tidy up behind us, right? Failure to clean the lint from the burner compartment and exhaust of the dryer may have contributed to the cause of the fire. If you know for sure that it did, great. But I think you're probably going to be a little safer, as we were talking earlier, to say that it may have contributed. We've got our ignition source and our material first ignited, so we want to identify that. The biggest thing I wanted to hit on this is it's got to be a competent ignition source. Competent. What does that mean? If I took a piece of paper, if I tore this off and held a piece of paper with a lighter, would that flame of the lighter and the act to bring them together, would that be sufficient to ignite that paper? Yeah, that's a competent, that flame is a competent ignition source for that. If I had a large block of wood and put it underneath, is it going to ignite? Probably not. It would take a really, really, really long time. So in that case, that same flame is not a competent heat source. Yes. Correct. So momentary, if you don't have the duration to rise or to raise the temperature of the paper enough that it ignites, you're not going to have a flame. And we've got the definition here: an ignition source that has sufficient energy and is capable of transferring that energy to the fuel long enough to raise the fuel to its ignition temperature. And it refers you to section 19 as well. But here's some popular ones. I would say open flame is probably the top of the list of ignition sources. What do you do if you've got an intentionally set fire, but you don't know if the person used a lighter or wood match or a paper match or anything? What do you say in your report? Yeah, maybe an unspecified open flame device, i.e. lighter, match, something like that. Arcs or sparks, cigarettes, fireworks, especially around the 4th of July, a few weeks before, a few weeks after. Heat from powered equipment, devices, lightning, heat from another fire, and spontaneous heating or combustion. Here's something you could write as far as defining your ignition source. Fire-specific ignition source was determined to be a candle flame or an unspecific or unspecified open flame device. Any of those you could use. Just some verbiage. Material first ignited. Here's the top ones: cooking fires. Some of the top fires in residentials, right? Residential fires. Cooking oil. How does the food on the stove or the cooking oil, how does that ignite? Curiously, does anybody have an answer to that? Does it boil over? and the flame catches underneath, or what happens? Okay, so basically you have to have sufficient temperature on the top, the cooktop, and it raises, right, the heat raises the temperature of the oil. Now the oil, whether it's new or old, may have different ignition temperatures within 100 or 200 degrees or something like that. But basically it rises to its auto ignition temperature and ignites. You'll get some smoke, and then it ignites. You've got now fire in the pan, which then spreads to other items. Ignitable vapors of flammable combustible liquids. This gets a little tough. If you've got flammable or combustible liquid, called ignitable liquid, disbursement throughout this room. The arsonist came in that door, and he came and poured it all throughout and left there, and he ignited it. Where is the point of origin? Hopefully it is, but hopefully it's 18 inches or less for your water heater. But the fact of the matter is, we're igniting the fuel vapors, correct? Not the liquid itself. Whether it gets lit over there or over here, sometimes you can determine whether there's closed off exits, that are bolted or locked, or where something got ignited or not. But anytime you have transient, movement of vapors, it's going to be where the source is. If if it's the water heater, it may travel back to that. If it's someone lighting it, you may or may not be able to know. So you just have to write that. Here's a couple examples for your material first ignited sentence. Determined to be nearby combustible items such as papers and wicker basket. Here's gasoline vapors that have been dispersed on the living room floor. And then we've got our ignition source. We've got our material first ignited. And how did those come together? It's the act or omission, correct? So what was occurring prior to the fire? What brought them together? Was it deliberate or was it accidental? I'm going to show you a cigarette caused fire in a few minutes. There's actually a video of it occurring. And the question, especially for wildland fires in California, if you're smoking a cigarette in a wildland area and you toss it, even if it was unintentional, could you get a 452 charge brought against you, right, for negligence? Yeah, or there's public resource codes too. Also, instead of just the act, it could be the omission. It could be a failure to turn something off, a heat producing device off. It could be a failure to blow the candle out. That could be what allows that heat source to come into contact with combustible items. Here's a couple possibilities. Suspect Smith intentionally lit a cigarette match delay device in the dry grass and drove away. Is that pretty deliberate, especially the device portion? How about John Jones deliberately poured lighter fluid onto a pile of clothing and ignited it with a match? That may be, you may have to go into, it's not the lighter fluid, it's the vapors of, but you get the idea. The tenant failed to blow the candle out on the living room table when she went to bed. All right, we're going to show you a video and then we're going to take a break so you guys can get ready. This occurred in Orange, California, and it happened to be caught on surveillance video. So you're going to hear this, and the sound you're hearing, they weren't able to extract it off the DVR, but they were able to video the video. So that's what you're hearing. I'm going to kind of walk you through how this works. So here's a back alley, back in a restaurant. They've got some, trash and debris out by close to the dumpster. I think there's a dumpster nearby. And what you're going to see, let's look at this area. Around here, there's going to be a person. You just flick the cigarette. You see that? And he walked away. The cigarette is right here. It's windy out there. You're going to see it roll. You see that? It's going to roll right up against the cardboard. And I'll have to go back to get you the relative humidity in a second. It was 54%, right? Remember that old thing, cigarettes, 18 to 22%. It's got to be back well. Under certain conditions and the right configuration, we're going to see it happen. I want you to keep in mind as we're watching this, what would happen? There's going to be some people, there's going to be a guy driving in there, there's going to be someone pushing the cart through. Imagine if you found somebody walking through there, which you're going to see, and then you stop later on from leaving the scene of the fire. And you sit there and say, we know you did it, you're the only one back there, right? And it wouldn't be, right? So they kind of keep some of those things in mind. I'm going to fast forward a little bit of this. You're going to see the wind blowing. See the wind moving stuff around. You see a car back in at the street. Like I said, a guy getting out, and remember, if you would have seen this, or someone saw them and said, "Hey, I saw a car in the alley," this fire's already been going. You don't see it yet, but it's already been ignited. So I'm going to fast forward this so we can move forward. All right, keep an eye on the area. We're going to look. Right here. See it? So we've now got ignition, and that was a little over 8 minutes. 8 minutes of burn time. So as we're watching this go, think about how would you write this up? What's the cause? Well, let's back up. Let's first say, I got open flame right now. The origin would be located to the rear of whatever the address was in the alley, the general. We just saw someone scoot by. The fire's more specific area of origin was located where? At near floor level in some cardboard boxes. There's another lady walking by. Yeah, she could have. So that gets going pretty well. It ends up getting knocked down before it gets into the structure. But again, we would call this an outside rubbish fire a lot of times, right? Not knowing. Now, this is pretty, what's the word? It's not very common that we'd have a video of a cigarette causing a fire, but we just saw it happen. Any questions while we're kind of watching this? 15-minute break? Then we'll come back. Okay.